over the last few years, I've done a number of shows on the wisdom of the Stoics. And you might have realized that amongst my favorite Stoic texts is the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, that great Roman emperor who wrote down his thoughts and musings on the trials and challenges of life. And although he wrote them pretty much only as a diary for himself, it remains to this very day one of the greatest guides to living recognized in the world. Well, I wonder if Marcus would have thought it was such a good idea to follow him as a guide. Perhaps after you've seen tonight's show, you'll think that Marcus might find it pretty ironic that we use his meditations as a guide to life and as a guide to being the best possible version of ourselves that we know how to be. Because although Marcus does suggest that that's what we do want from our lives, as you'll see, he also tells us we shouldn't really take that advice from other people. Where should we take it from? What does he say? Well, a couple of months ago, I read an article on various people's favorite bits of advice from Marcus Aurelius. So I thought I'd share a few of those with you today, and in a nutshell, find a great guide to living, especially in this challenging world, as given to us by the Stoics nearly 2,000 years ago. One of the most basic things that Marcus reminds us is that you can't really see your own life while you're in it. You don't have enough perspective on yourself, and obviously you can't possibly be objective when you are the subject of your own life. And so as a result of that basic wisdom, that means you've got to be careful not to judge yourself, especially deciding too soon whether something has worked, whether something's gone the way you think or something like that. And secondly, if you accept that you can't really see your own life while you're doing it, then you've got to ensure that you don't rush to prevent yourself from doing things that you think that the outcome isn't working or didn't work last time. Most importantly, very often while we're doing stuff, found a solution to a problem, we found what we need to do, we know what we need to do. If we rush to judgment too soon, we're probably going to see it's not working the way I thought, or the outcome isn't happening at all, and we can easily give up too soon. Marcus says that because we can't see our own lives clearly, we often fail to act completely, because it looks like, what's the point? Nothing is coming of this. There is no purpose for this after all. The bottom line is, in any situation, you don't really know what the outcome of your action is going to be. You can't guarantee the outcome of your action in the first place. You don't know what that's about. So, like many of the Marcus lessons, it's got a lot to do with living in the present, where Marcus is saying all that you can do is focus on the here and now, focus on the doing of it rather than the outcome. And so when you find yourself judging yourself or judging the results of something before it's completely through to the other end, you remind yourself, my job is to actually just do it, and we'll see afterwards, and I'll see by the outcomes what the result is, rather than how I imagine my own life is going. And as we'll see, there is also another piece of advice related to exactly the same thing. Then another great piece of basic Stoic advice is, once you decide something, stick to that decision. It isn't so much even about being indecisive. Anyway, indecisiveness can actually be unlearned by developing strategies to decide. The strategy of decision is understanding that it's the act of decision that is the action that enables us to reach the goal. A decision commits us to a path, and decision becomes action. The weighing things up is the indecisiveness that allows us to not act and not be responsible for whatever goes wrong. And it's very often we're afraid of what goes wrong, and that's why we're not making any decision. So Marcus's advice is to remember that the goal and the steps that you need to take to get to that goal are not separate things. We often treat them as if as if they are. We often justify what went wrong by making those two things separate things, when in fact they aren't. If we make the decision to act and the action required part of exactly the same task, not two steps, but the one step that is required, the decision makes the action happen. It becomes, once I've made my decision, the ball is already rolling. I've got to then do step 2, which is the beginning of the actual action. So if you can then stick to the one whole thing, it becomes easier because the decision is already made. And sticking to that one whole thing means you will get to the outcome. And thirdly, on the subject of not getting there, we actually also need to be grateful for our failures, say the Stoics, says Marcus. You know, Marcus himself says that if he had been better at writing and better at rhetoric, and language was a very important skill back in ancient times, and he says if I'd been better at that, I would have become a writer and not been a very great writer. I would have just been good enough to become a writer and not have the life that I did have, which was, as Emperor of Rome, and ultimately as the author of the Meditations, although he wouldn't define himself that way. He did write it late in his life for himself as a reflection, never really even thought he or it was particularly successful. But he had his point right, where he says, if I'd been more successful at the things I failed at, I wouldn't have the life I do have. I wouldn't be able to do the things that I do have. And that is the bottom line of why we need to be grateful for our failures, because failure guides us away from what we don't need and what we can't actually do and towards what we can. Nobody can do everything. So if we learn to accept failure is a fantastic indication from the universe that that's not for me. It narrows the possibilities and makes it easier to find what is for me. It makes it easier to give up what doesn't work for me and concentrate on what does. Failure is not only a powerful lesson in life about what happened there, but knowing what we can't do is incredibly empowering, especially in a world that would like to make us believe we can do absolutely anything, which is unmistakably just not true. It would be nice, but it's not true. And that understanding of letting go of what doesn't work for me and what it isn't about me, and being a failure at that thing because those skills are not mine. It's so liberating to let go of what you can't do. So embrace failure because it does give us that option. On the other hand, Marcus tells us that we still need to have some purpose for what we do. We need to find a life purpose, but it doesn't have to be in the big and meaningful Oprah Winfrey kind of sense that we've all got to do something meaningful. You've got to do things which help the world or help other people or whatever. For some people, those might be a purpose of life, but a purpose doesn't have to be grand, and it doesn't have to go beyond yourself and your own life. Rather define it as a reason for doing it. Even if the reason is because I love to do it. In fact, that's a fantastic reason anyway. So the purpose could be, it makes me feel like myself. It makes me feel good. I get a happy outcome or I get a lot of money. The purpose can be, it makes a difference in my society or my community. No purpose is better than any other. The reason why you do something can be any reason, but, says Marcus, let there be a reason. Because if you've got a reason, you're much more likely to get to the end result. And anyway, as Marcus is fond of reminding us, as all the Stoics are, in the end you're going to die, and then you'll have nothing. So you might as well do what you are all about. While I've said one purpose is no greater than any other purpose, the ultimate purpose is to be ourselves. And one of the important ways to be ourselves is to do what makes us feel right and like ourselves. So typically that means using our skills, using our talents, and doing things we've always liked. That is a good enough purpose to do that. Similarly, says Marcus, only you can help yourself. Only you are responsible for yourself. And it's not how we live our lives. We tend to look for all sorts of distractions and affirmations. We look for likes. We get second opinions. We ask other people when we don't even need to ask. And, the classic example I always find is every time I post something I baked on Facebook, everyone asks me the recipe and please and begs, and it's like, where do you think I got the recipe from? Google. I Googled it. We can help ourselves even right over there. Of course, it doesn't work for every occasion, but it's a good example of the fact that it's actually only you that can help ourselves. By looking for distractions, we're looking for some kind of affirmation or to shift our mood all the time. We're needing support from others when in fact we should be supporting ourselves and kind of getting that support from ourselves. So if we learn to help ourselves and support ourselves, we can guarantee a greater satisfaction with the outcome. I mean, we live in a world that tells us we can't help ourselves. You need this book, you need this method, you need this course, you need this medication, you need this alternative remedy. You continuously need something other than yourself in order to help yourself. Well, guess what? That isn't the truth. Only you can help yourself because, says Marcus, you have all the resources you need already. In the same way that we're born loving certain things, able to do certain things, those things are resources for us. And if we draw on our resources, we can help ourselves. It's a little bit like a musical person, say, just to use an example, might know that they could ask for a million kinds of help when they're in an emotional situation, but probably sitting down and playing their instrument is going to help them more than anything else because it helps them be themselves. And if you yourself, and only you can help yourself, you're ready to get help. So remember, and of course he's really talking about take responsibility for your own life. If you are the one that's responsible for helping yourself, then you can always be helped. If there's some kind of special potion or course or outsider that you need, 50-50 at best. What if you don't get help? Bring it all back to yourself. You'll always be in the pound seats. Similar and kind of parallel to the idea that we can support ourselves and we can help ourselves is the commonly held idea that was also important to the Stoics, that nothing happens that you're not able to cope with. It really just means that all the resources are inside ourselves. Marcus says that everything that a person needs to avoid real harm is placed within them. And it's kind of a fact of nature. Let's say 90-something% of the time, we have what we need in order to avoid the real harm and perhaps maximize the possibilities, the gains, and those kind of things. Again, that same idea of the world of self-improvement and the requirements for courses and all of those kind of things makes us think that we don't, that we need something from outside of ourselves. We need to remember that we've created a society based on selling each other what we have told each other that we need. As we know, the whole nature of consumer society is that we first need to be persuaded that we need something that we've never had or never needed before, and then we get it sold to us. We need to be made desperate to want it if other people have it, or for some reason you're missing out of something. There's so many things we could describe that fit into that. I don't even want to go there. But I think one of the important ones to remember and to understand how problematical it is being sold cures. Cures for just really being ourselves. So there is no cure outside of you that helps you be a better you. Like everything else in nature, you were born as the perfect you, because what else could it be? Ask any rose or ask anything in nature. That's all it is, and that's all it knows how to be. That's what it's genetically programmed to be, and cosmically and spiritually and whatever other programs might exist. in the world of this cosmos, the strange meaning of life, cosmos. So it doesn't have to mean there's someone looking after you when we say nothing happens that you can't cope with yourself. It really just reflects the fact that the resources you need lie within you. You don't need to rely on something outside of yourself. You don't actually need that course or that potion to be your best self. Because otherwise what? This is an imperfect universe with imperfect creatures, and only that person can fix it. It just kind of doesn't make sense. Whatever this universe is, the safest thing to assume is that it's precisely as it needs to be, or is intended to be, or there is no other way it could be. Whether that intention comes from a conscious being or not is even besides the point. Presumably, this is exactly how it's supposed to be because this is how it is. Why would it need us to fix it? Us of all people, humans much better at destroying things than fixing them. So that brings us back to nothing happens that you can't cope with. We all kind of designed or evolved or whatever it is to handle precisely the world we find ourselves in. That is the nature of nature. Chill and be yourself. Every other creature is doing exactly that and not reading the classifieds, looking for the latest self-help. I have spoken about blame on this show before, and it is a topic that Marcus Aurelius also picks up when he says the best revenge is not to be like the person who's hurting you. Don't blame them. Don't get your revenge on them. The best revenge is just to not be like that, to not respond the same way, to respond with love or a smile, to create change instead of reaction. That's such a powerful one. Create a change. Don't just react. It's almost like set an example. And instead of dealing with however they've hurt you, you just shift the whole situation by not going down the road of reaction and doing something which gets beyond that, and perhaps even which shows the aggressor, whoever it is, a thing or two along the way. Change is inevitable and change is necessary in order to deal with the world. We need to remember that all change essentially starts with one person. Think about it. Think about the incredible things that have happened in the world in the last few weeks, which, although has brought some fear and chaos along the way, it's the signs of change. And where does that change come from? It comes from one person deciding to do something differently as to how it's been done before, and provoking a change. That happens on a large scale, like we're seeing nowadays with the protests around the world for Black Lives Matter and for the issues that arise out of racism that have continued despite all the top-down changes that the governments of the world would like to say they made over the last many decades. The real change starts with one person, and that's what we have seen in the world around us. And then Marcus takes that back to the idea of revenge. If you respond to the person who hurt you with the same thing or the version of whatever they did to you, you haven't changed anything. You've perpetuated a world where that's going to happen again. That person might do it to someone else, or it might be done to you again. But if you completely change how you deal with the status quo, if you change your response so that you don't come from a negative space, because ultimately this is you in charge of you. So if you change your response so that you're coming from a strong, more positive space, you're likely to have an effect larger than yourself. And people say, what can one person do? One person becomes 2 people, becomes 4 people, becomes 10 people, becomes a march, becomes a movement. It really can happen. So, be the change you want to see is very often said as a kind of a saying or a catchphrase in our world today. But the bottom line really, says Marcus, is don't react to those who provoke you the same way that they did it to you. And that's clearly what would change the world. Lots to think about in that particular one. Marcus points out that we pursue so many trivial and meaningless things, and basically we waste our lives, and the thing that is most trivial and that most unnecessary in order to pursue is fame. We're looking for recognition, not only just likes like that on social media, but we want to be recognized, we want to be special, we want to have our name become immortal. And Marcus says, well, that's the only kind of mortality you get. Your name becomes immortal. But he says, so what? It's your name. It's a sound. It's a sound echoing through the empty halls of history. It's dramatic. Listen, we recognize Marcus's name. Marcus Aurelius doesn't echo through an empty hall. He's a powerful influencer, way more powerful than he was in his own time, even as Emperor of Rome. Because here his influence has gone on for 2,000 years. But no one knows who he really was. No one knows him. The actual person, Marcus Aurelius, is not known. We've got bits of his history. We've got what he wrote. But essentially, as he would say, it's a hollow echo in the halls of history. He didn't do it for the fame. He did it for himself. And that's what he's been telling us all the time. You rely on yourself. You do it for yourself. You do it because yourself, whatever the case may be. He says, the things we want in life are empty, stale, and trivial. We are like quarreling children, laughing and then bursting into tears a moment later. Our desires are ever changing, inconstant, and therefore not worth very much. And that is so true. We're never satisfied with what we've got. As soon as we've got something, we want something else, or we want more, or we are just continuously dissatisfied. And we are looking for something that is going to make us feel special. Imagine that we are special because of it. We're constantly wanting something else. Marcus says this is no way to build a life. This is no life at all. Rather, he says, spend your life pursuing more tangible and lasting things than fame. Inner contentment, self-development and self-knowledge, wisdom, self-belief. Rather than chasing that fame or immortality, he suggests live your life in the present and strive to do that well. That could be an incredible achievement because it means that everything else works better for you. And that is the ultimate achievement, way more than fame. It's so ironic that we now live in a world where fame is the objective itself. I want to be famous on YouTube is a kind of a legitimate aspiration that someone might have. And the question of what did you do actually on YouTube that made you so famous? What was the thing you actually did that everyone on YouTube knows about? That isn't part of the picture. I just want to be famous. We're chasing empty goals. So Marcus says, ultimately, know yourself. The only significant thing to know is know yourself. Find out what inhabits your mind and what kind of soul you have, he says. Is it a child's soul, a tyrant's soul, a predator, or its prey? Know yourself. Be honest with yourself and be kind to yourself. He says, don't feel exasperated or defeated or despondent because your days aren't packed with wise and moral actions. Get back to when you fail. Celebrate behaving like a human, however imperfectly, and fully embrace the pursuits that you have embarked upon. And then with a little bit of balance, and always a last thing to remember, but don't be too productive. Remember, fun is a worthy goal. Pleasure in being and doing your best at who you are is a worthy goal. And since being human is hard and brief, you've got to make sure you're also doing things that you love. That will eventually get us right back to where you started. Be doing things you love, reminds you who you are, reminds you what you're capable of, what makes you feel most like you. And as long as you cling to that and cultivate that, you can actually live your best life. 2,000 years of wisdom and still at it. Endless gems. You can find your own. I will be back in the future with more from the Stoics, and I'll see you back here next week.